Desmond Vance shoved my pregnant wife down 3 concrete steps outside an elementary school in Calgary on a Thursday afternoon, and then he stopped, on the walkway, in front of a running camera, and brushed off the sleeve of his jacket. 9 seconds. That is the whole clip. And those 9 seconds are the reason that 90 days later he had lost a building, a board seat, the right to cross the border without asking permission, and a signature he will be putting on a check every March for the rest of his working life. But I am getting ahead of myself. I do that when I am angry. And I was angry that Thursday quietly, the way a man is angry when he has spent his whole life reading documents and has just realized which document matters. My name is Everett Kowalchuk. I am 49. I live in Mount Royal in Calgary, in a house my grandmother would have found ridiculous. On a street where the elms are older than the province's oil industry, and the houses sit back from the road as though they are embarrassed about something. I am not a developer. I am not a financier. What I am on paper is the trustee and sole administrator of a family land trust that owns 11 parcels in the city, 6 of them downtown, none of which we have ever sold. Before that, I practiced real estate law for 14 years at a firm on 7th Avenue, which means I have spent the majority of my adult life reading contracts the way most people read their own medical results, slowly, and twice, and with the assumption that the important sentence is the one nobody expects to matter. My wife is Priya Raval. She is 34. She teaches a specialized learning classroom, grade 2, 11 children, at Hawthorne Ridge Elementary in the Northeast. 4 of her students are non-speaking. 2 of them are only just learning to sign their own names. She has done this work for 9 years, and she comes home tired in a very particular way, not the tiredness of a difficult meeting, but the tiredness of somebody who has spent 7 hours being the one calm object in a room that 11 children were trying to survive. She was 6 months pregnant on the Thursday this happened. The call came at 4:12 in the afternoon. I was at the kitchen table with the Trust's annual land title review spread out in front of me, because it was September. And September is when I do it, and I do it because my grandmother did it every September for 43 years, and it never once occurred to me to stop. Priya's voice was level, too level. It is the voice she uses when she is managing something and does not want me to hear the managing. I need to tell you something, she said. I'm okay, the baby's okay. I want you to have both of those before anything else. I've got them, I said. A man pushed me, she said, outside the front doors, on the steps. He came out fast, she said. There was a ribbon cutting for the new playground. I was going down and he was coming out, and I was in his way and he put his hand out and she stopped. He pushed, not a bump, Everett, a push. And I went down 3 steps and landed on my hip. Are you hurt? My hip's bruised. The baby's fine. Ainsley took me to the health center right away, and they did a monitor strip and everything is fine. Did he say anything? He said, watch it. A pause. And then he stopped on the walkway and he brushed off his sleeve, where I'd touched him. He brushed his sleeve off and he kept walking. I looked at the window over the sink. The Chinook arch was sitting over the mountains, that long gray lens of cloud, the sky underneath it the color of an old dime. Was anybody filming? I asked. For the playground. They had a camera on the doors. Who was he? I don't know. Suit. Gray hair at the sides. He got into a black Range Rover with somebody holding the door. Priya, I said, do not sign anything at the school tonight. Do not talk to anybody. Let me make a phone call first. There was a silence on the line, and it went on a beat longer than it should have, and then she said, Everett, I already called the police, from the front office. Before I called you, I sat there with my hand flat on a stack of land title certificates. Good, I said, and I meant it, and my voice did something I hadn't given it permission to do. I didn't want you to do it for me, she said. I wanted my own name on it. Then it's your name on it, I said. Come home, I'll make soup. What are you going to do? Nothing dramatic, I said. I'm going to phone Ingrid. I should explain the context because the context is the entire story, and without it, the rest of this sounds like luck. In 1961, my grandmother, Helena Kowalchuk, went into a bank on 8th Avenue to ask for a mortgage. She was 38 years old. She had come over from Turnapel at 14. She ran a boarding house with 16 beds on a lot she had bought outright with cash from 12 years of feeding railway men, and she wanted to buy the 2 lots beside it. The bank told her they would be pleased to help her as soon as her husband came in to sign. Her husband had been dead for 6 years. They told her that was unfortunate. They told her she could bring in a brother, or a son, or any adult man really, and the paperwork would move quickly. She left. She bought the 2 lots anyway, over 11 years, in cash in pieces, and she never borrowed $1 from a bank in her life. And when developers began circling the block in 1961, she refused to sell. Not once, not for any figure. Instead, she did something that a woman with a grade 6 education and no lawyer of her own had no business thinking of. She found a lawyer of her own. His name was Wilfred Doucette. He had an office above a shoe repair on First Street, and together they wrote a 99-year ground lease. She would lease the land. She would not sell it. The tenant could build whatever the tenant liked. At the end of 99 years, in 2060, the land and everything standing on it would come back to her family, free and clear, and in the meantime the tenant would pay ground rent every year forever. That is not the unusual part. Ground leases are ordinary. Half of downtown Vancouver sits on one. The unusual part is on page 71, clause 19.4. Doucette wrote it, but the language is hers, because I have her handwriting on the draft in a shoebox in my basement. It provides that if the leaseholder, or any principal of the leaseholder, conducts himself toward any person in a manner that a person of ordinary decency would find shameful, and such conduct is established by admission, by conviction, or by evidence a reasonable person would accept, then the landlord may declare the lease in default, and if the default is not cured within 90 days, the leasehold interest reverts to the landlord. Reverts. Not damages may be sought, not the landlord may seek relief. Reverts. When I found that clause the first time at 26, freshly called to the bar and going through her files after the stroke, I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in the basement. I thought, nobody would ever sign this. I thought, this is a proud old woman writing a curse into a legal document. And then I checked, and I found that 4 separate leaseholders signed it since 1961, because ground leases get assigned, and each assignee takes the lease as it stands, and nobody in 60 years had ever read past page 60, because pages 60 to 80 are the boilerplate, and boilerplate is where the money isn't. In 2011, the leasehold on the corner parcel was assigned to a numbered Alberta company controlled by Vance Meridian Group. The consent to assignment was signed by Desmond Vance personally, along with a personal covenant guaranteeing the ground rent for the remainder of the term, which he agreed to in exchange for a rent holiday during construction. I remember reviewing it. I remember thinking his lawyers had done a sloppy job on the covenant. I was 34 and I said nothing, because the rent was good and the covenant favored us, and it is not my job to improve the other side's paperwork. On that corner, Vance built Meridian Court, 58 stories, $1.4 billion. It has a waterfall in the lobby and an art installation that cost more than my grandmother's boarding house earned in its entire existence. It stands on her land. Desmond Vance had never met me. He knew the trust as a mailing address and an annual invoice. He knew the name Kowalchuk as a line item. For 18 years, I had been exactly the kind of landlord a developer prays for. Silent, punctual, uninterested. There had never been a single reason for him to learn my face. On that Thursday afternoon, coming out of an elementary school, where he had just handed over a check for a playground with his company's name on it, he found a pregnant woman in his way on the steps, and he removed her, and he brushed his sleeve. The sleeve. That is what I kept coming back to. Not the push. The sleeve. Ingrid Halloran has an office on 5th Avenue with a view of the bow that she says she never looks at. She is 62. She has been my lawyer for 11 years, and she was my grandmother's lawyer's articling student, which is a coincidence that stopped feeling like one somewhere around the 3rd week of all this. She is precise, and she is slow to promise, which means that when she says a thing can be done, the thing can be done. She picked up on the second ring. Everett. I need the news footage from Hawthorne Ridge Elementary from this afternoon, I said. Front entrance. Between 3:40 and 4 o'clock, my wife was assaulted on the front steps. It's on camera, a pause of exactly one breath. Is Priya all right? She is. The baby is. She's already made a police report. Good girl, Ingrid said, which nobody else on earth is allowed to say. What do you need from me tonight? Find out who was at that ribbon cutting, I said, and pull the Meridian Court ground lease out of my file. Clause 19.4. There was a longer pause on Ingrid's end. I could hear her chair. Everett, she said. Do you already know who it was? I have a theory, I said. The car was a black Range Rover and somebody held the door. Priya came home at 6:40. She walked in slowly, the way you walk when a hip is going purple, and she put her bag on the chair and she stood in the middle of the kitchen with her coat still on and she said, I'm fine. And then she cried for about 90 seconds, standing up with her hands over her face off, and then she stopped and washed her hands and sat down and ate soup. That is who she is. People do not understand this about her. They see the classroom and the softness, and they miss the iron. Ainsley took a picture of the steps, she said, the corner where I landed. She's a first-year Everett. 23 years old. She came running out with no shoes on. Ainsley who? Ainsley Prudhomme, educational assistant. She's the one who said, "Don't clean off your skirt yet, don't touch anything." Priya shook her head. A 23-year-old told me that. I wrote the name down. Who do you think he is? She asked. I'll know tonight. She looked at me for a while over the bowl. She has a way of doing that. Are you going to do something stupid? She said. No, I said. I'm going to do something slow. Ingrid called at 9:48 that evening. The ribbon cutting had been for the Vance Meridian Community Playground, and the man who cut the ribbon and left 40 minutes later at speed because a reporter had asked him about a labor complaint on the Meridian Field site was Desmond Vance, 46, chairman and controlling shareholder of Vance Meridian Group. I thanked her. I hung up. Priya was upstairs asleep with an ice pack on her hip and a pillow between her knees. I went down to the basement and got the shoebox. I read Clause 19:4 3 times, standing up under the bare bulb, holding my grandmother's draft with the 2 words she had crossed out and rewritten in blue ink. Ordinary decency. She had first written Christian decency, and then she had crossed out Christian, and then she had written ordinary, and I have thought about that correction more in the last year than about almost anything else in my life. I put the box back on the shelf. I went to bed. I did not sleep for a long time. I lay in the dark next to my wife, who made a small sound every time she moved her hip, and I thought about a man stopping on a walkway in front of a school and taking the time, the actual seconds, to brush her off his sleeve. Ingrid had the footage by 9 the next morning. The station's lawyer handed it over without a fight once she explained what it was. The clip is 9 seconds. It has no sound. Vance comes out of the doors moving fast, half a step ahead of a man carrying his coat. Priya is on the top step with a box of laminated picture cards. He does not slow. His left hand comes up and out and catches her shoulder, and he pushes, from the shoulder, straight-armed, the way you would push a turnstile. She goes down. He takes 4 steps. He stops. He looks back at her on the concrete, and he says something, and he takes his right hand and brushes his left sleeve, twice, from the shoulder toward the elbow, and then he walks to the car. It's not ambiguous, Ingrid said. There's no crowd pressure. He isn't jostled. His hand initiates contact and his weight goes into it. The sleeve, I said. The sleeve is what will finish him, she said. The push is an assault. The sleeve is a character reference. We sat in her boardroom with the ground lease printed and tabbed, and a pot of coffee she had made herself instead of having somebody bring in, which is a quality I have never stopped finding reassuring in a professional. Walk me through 19:4 before I give you my read, she said. Conduct a person of ordinary decency would find shameful, I said. Established by admission, by conviction, or by evidence a reasonable person would accept. 9 seconds of broadcast quality video of him pushing a visibly pregnant woman down a set of stairs and then cleaning his jacket is evidence a reasonable person would accept. It doesn't require a conviction. It offers conviction as one of 3 routes. Ingrid nodded slowly. And if he cures the default within 90 days? He can't, I said. That's the second thing Doucette did. Read the definition of cure. She turned to page 73 and read it out loud. Cure for the purposes of Clause 19 means the removal of the offending principal from any controlling interest in the leaseholder. Ingrid set down the page. She looked out the window at the river she says she never looks at. He can't apologize his way out, she said. He can't pay his way out. He can only leave or lose a 58-story building, I said. Everett, she said. This clause is 64 years old and it has never been tested, and there is a real chance a judge looks at it and calls it an unenforceable penalty. Then let's find out, I said. File the caveat this afternoon. We registered a caveat against the title at the Alberta Land Titles Office at 2:26 p.m. on Friday, September 19th, and Ingrid served a notice of default on Vance Meridian Group by courier. Not email, courier, because I wanted a signature at the front desk at 3:51 the same day. The notice attached the video, cited Clause 19:4, and started a 90-day clock. That evening, Priya sat on the couch with her feet on my lap and an ice pack under her hip, and she said, "How much is that building worth?" To him, "About $400 million in equity." She was very quiet. "Everett," she said, "I don't want money. I know. He pushed me down 3 steps and he didn't even see me. I don't want money out of that. Money makes it a transaction. It makes it a thing he paid for." She pressed her palm against the side of the bump, the way she did when the baby moved. "I want him to not be able to do it again. To anybody. That's all. That's the whole thing. I thought about that for a long time, longer than she knows." "All right," I said. "90 days," she said, reading the paper in my lap. 90 days. If you've been with this channel a while and you want stories like this one to keep coming, the like button genuinely matters, and so does subscribing. Most people listen all the way through and never do either. Welcome back to Warm Family Revenge. Get comfortable. The people in these accounts had every chance to behave decently. They chose otherwise. Vance's lawyer called Ingrid on Monday morning. His name was Curtis Ferland, 54, senior litigation partner at a firm on 3rd, and Ingrid described him afterward as pleasant, well-prepared, and not remotely surprised, which she said was the most informative thing about him. His opening position had 3 legs. 1. Clause 19(4) was void for uncertainty, because a person of ordinary decency is not a legal standard. 2. Reversion of a $1.4 billion improvement over a shoulder check on a staircase was so grotesquely disproportionate that any court in Alberta would relieve against forfeiture. 3. And this is where I stopped being merely angry. The contact was accidental. My wife had stepped into his client's path, and there were serious questions about the reliability of her account. He said serious questions, Ingrid told me. What does that mean in practice? In practice, it means he's going to try to make her the story. He did. On October 2nd, Ferland filed an application seeking production of Priya's complete medical records for the preceding 5 years, on the theory that a prior hip or balance issue might explain the fall. He filed a second application seeking her employment file, on the theory that her account of the incident might be colored by a labor grievance she had signed 4 years earlier about classroom staffing ratios. I read the applications at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. I am going to tell you the truth here, because everybody in these stories is always so composed, and it is not honest. I got up and I went out to the garage, and I stood there in the dark with my hands on the workbench for about 4 minutes. There is a place in the drywall where my grandmother's shelf brackets used to be, and I put my fist through it. Not hard, not even satisfying. And then I stood there and looked at the hole in the drywall in my own garage, like an idiot, 49 years old. And I understood something I had not understood at 26 when I laughed at that clause in the basement. She hadn't written it out of pride. She had written it because she knew exactly what happens to a woman on a set of steps when the man who pushed her has lawyers. I patched the drywall the next morning before Priya came downstairs. She found it anyway 3 weeks later, and she never said a word about it, which is worse. Ingrid opposed both applications and won both, and it took 11 days and $31,000, and it delayed nothing. And that was the entire point of them. Ferland was not trying to win. He was trying to buy days off my 90. Here is what he did not account for. Bernadette Okonkwo is 58. She has worked as an overnight custodian in the lobby of Meridian Court since the building opened in 2016. In February of 2023, at approximately 11:20 p.m., she was running a floor scrubber near the waterfall when Desmond Vance came through the lobby with 2 guests. Her machine was in his path. He told her to move it. She told him she had 4 more meters and would be clear in a moment. He put his hand on the handle of the scrubber and drove it into the base of the waterfall, cracking a marble-facing panel, and told her, in front of his 2 guests, that if she wanted to be treated like a person, she could try being somewhere a person belonged. She filed a written complaint with building management the next morning. 8 days later, she was offered $4,000 and a form to sign. The form said she released all claims and agreed not to discuss the matter. She had a daughter in her 2nd year at Mount Royal. She signed it. I know all of this because Ainsley Prudhomme, the 23-year-old educational assistant with no shoes on, saw the 9 seconds on the news like everybody else in the country, and she posted about it, and Bernadette's daughter saw the post, and she showed it to her mother, and Bernadette sat with it for 6 days, and then she phoned the school and asked to speak to the pregnant teacher. They met at a cafe on 17th. I was not there. Priya went alone because Bernadette asked for that, and because Priya said afterward that a woman who has been silent for 2 years is not going to open her mouth in front of a man in a good coat. Priya came home and stood in the doorway with her keys still in her hand. "There's another one," she said. "I want to be very careful about what happened next, because this is the part where the story could have gone somewhere I would not be proud of." The NDA Bernadette had signed was, in Ingrid's view, probably unenforceable as against a criminal complaint, and probably unenforceable as against a subpoena, and definitely unenforceable in the court of public opinion. Ingrid could have leaked it in an hour. Bernadette did not want that. What Bernadette wanted, and she said this to Priya twice, was to be believed by somebody official, not famous, official, so we did it the slow way. Ingrid found Bernadette her own lawyer, a separate lawyer, paid for out of the trust with instructions in writing that she reported to Bernadette alone and that I would never see a word of her file. Bernadette's lawyer took her statement to the Crown Prosecutor's Office and to the Alberta Human Rights Commission and to nobody else. I never met her until the very end. I want that on the record. The journalist's name was Josephine Tremblay. She is 41. She covers commercial real estate for a national business daily out of the Calgary Bureau, and she has broken 3 stories in this city in the last 4 years that cost people their jobs. I did not call her. I called a man named Hugh Marchetti, who I articled with in 1999 and who has spent 20 years in business journalism, and I told him I had something. Is this a grudge, Everett? Hugh asked. Yes, I said. Entirely. It is a complete grudge, and I have a direct financial interest, and I will say all of that on the record. Hugh was quiet. Then he said, "That's the only answer that would have made me call her." Josephine Tremblay phoned me the next morning at 8:05 and asked 3 questions before she said hello. Was the video authentic and unedited? Was the ground lease real and could she see the clause? Did I stand to gain financially? Yes, yes, and yes. The gain is going to be in the story, she said. You understand that, not as an accusation, as a fact. Readers will decide whether you're a husband or a landlord. I'm both, I said. That's what makes it work. Her story ran on Tuesday, October 21 at 6 a.m. Mountain, which is 8 in Toronto, which is before the exchange opens. The headline was, 64-year-old clause could strip Vance of Meridian Court. The subhead mentioned the video. The 11th paragraph mentioned Bernadette Okonkwo, whose lawyer had authorized a single sentence, that a formal complaint concerning Mr. Vance's conduct had been filed with the Crown in 2023 and resolved by a payment and a non-disclosure agreement. The units of the REIT that holds Vance Meridian's income properties opened down 9% and closed down 11.5%. 2 institutional investors, one of them a public sector pension plan that manages, among other things, the retirement money of every teacher in this province, announced by noon that they were reviewing their positions. Priya read the story at the kitchen table while I made her toast. She was very still. My name's in it, she said. Do you want it out? I can call her. No. She put the phone down. Bernadette's in it. That's what matters. She looked at me over the top of the toast. Everett. He still doesn't know who you are, does he? No, 18 years. 18 years. She got up and got her bag and kissed the top of my head and went to teach 11 children 3 weeks before her leave started, with a bruise on her hip the size of a dinner plate. I sat in the kitchen for a while. Then I phoned Ingrid and said, "Tell Furland I'll meet his client." The application was heard on November 6 in the Court of King's Bench of Alberta before Justice Rosalind Ferreira in courtroom 1201 of the Calgary Courts Centre, which is a building made almost entirely of glass and is, in November, extremely cold in a way that feels editorial. Furlan went first. He spoke for 51 minutes. He was excellent. He argued uncertainty. He argued that Clause 19.4 was a forfeiture provision of monstrous disproportion, and that equity has relieved against forfeiture since the 17th century for exactly this reason. He cited 5 cases. He said the word draconian 4 times, and each time it sounded a little less persuasive, which is what happens to that word. He did not at any point say that the contact had been accidental. He had abandoned that. I noticed the moment he abandoned it. It was in his written brief, filed the Friday before, and it wasn't in his oral argument, and Ingrid noticed too, and she wrote 1 word on her pad and turned it toward me. Gone. Ingrid spoke for 22 minutes. She did 3 things. She told the court that Clause 19.4 is not a penalty clause because it does not extract money. It terminates a relationship, and a landlord's right to choose who occupies her land for the next 35 years is not a windfall. It is the core of what a ground lease is. She told the court that a person of ordinary decency is not uncertain because our courts apply the reasonable person's standard several thousand times a day. And if that standard is good enough to send a man to prison, it is good enough to end a lease. And then she played 9 seconds of video on the courtroom monitors. I watched Furland. He did not look at the screen. He looked at the table in front of him, at the corner of his own binder, the whole 9 seconds, and I understood that he had watched it enough times already. Justice Ferreira asked him 1 question. Mr. Furland, your brief describes the contact as incidental. Do you maintain that? Furland stood up. He took a moment. We say the contact was not the product of malice, my lady. That isn't what I asked. She turned back to the monitor and looked at the frozen frame. It was the frame with his hand on his sleeve. Counsel, the man in this recording is dusting his jacket. Is there a characterization of that gesture that you would like to offer me? The courtroom was very quiet. There is a particular quality of quiet in a glass building. No, my lady, Ferland said. She reserved for 11 days, and then released a written decision on November 17 that ran to 26 pages, and I am going to quote only the last 4 words of paragraph 61, because they are the only 4 words I have ever seen a judge write that made my hands shake. The clause, she wrote, was clear, freely bargained, assumed with full notice by a sophisticated commercial party, and was not disproportionate, because the bargain the leaseholder struck was never the right to occupy the land. It was the right to occupy the land while behaving like a human being. The caveat stood. The default stood. The 90-day clock had never stopped. 62 days had already run. Somewhere in there, in a corridor of the same building on a different floor, the other thing was happening, and I want to tell you about it plainly. Because when people hear a story like this one, they always assume that the money did the work, and the law did nothing. And that is exactly backwards. Priya's complaint went to the Crown on the 22nd of September. The Crown prosecutor was Yvonne Sarsfield. Assault under Section 266 of the Criminal Code. Summary conviction. In late October, Vance's criminal counsel, a different lawyer, an expensive one out of Toronto, proposed a resolution, a guilty plea in exchange for conditional discharge, plus a charitable donation, plus a letter of apology. A conditional discharge means you plead guilty, and you are found guilty, and then, after your probation, you have no criminal record. Yvonne Sarsfield phoned Priya to tell her about the offer, because that is what a Crown does, and she explained the mechanics of it carefully and without pressure, and then Priya asked her one question, which was, what happens to the next Bernadette? Sarsfield said the Crown's position was that a discharge was not in the public interest. She did not budge for 6 weeks. On December 3, Desmond Vance stood up in courtroom 508 and pleaded guilty to assault. He received a suspended sentence, 18 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and a no-contact order, and a criminal record. That record has consequences that no amount of money softens, and every Canadian watching this knows at least one of them. He cannot enter the United States without applying for a waiver and being interviewed about it. Not once, every time. His firm's license conditions with the Real Estate Council required disclosure within 30 days. 2 of the 3 charitable boards he sat on have bylaws requiring the resignation of any director convicted of an offense involving violence, and he resigned from both by email on December 5 and 6. Priya read her victim impact statement in that courtroom. It was 4 paragraphs. She did not describe the bruise, or the monitor strip, or the night she lay awake with her hand on her belly counting kicks. She described a boy in her class named Theodore, who is 7 and cannot speak, and who, when someone falls down on the playground, walks over and sits beside them and says nothing at all until they are ready to get up. That is a child who has never had a single word, she said to the courtroom, and he understands more about what to do when a person is on the ground than the man behind me. Vance did not look at her. He looked at the table. He requested the meeting on December 8. His people framed it as a settlement conference. Ingrid told me it was a look-you-in-the-eye conference, which is what men in that position always eventually ask for when the paperwork has stopped going their way, and she advised against it, and I said I was going anyway, and she said, then I'm coming, and you'll say nothing that isn't in writing. And I said, Ingrid, and she said, fine, 1 sentence, you may have 1 sentence. The room was on the 41st floor of a tower he did not build. Ferland was there, 2 associates, a financial advisor, Ingrid on my left. Vance came in 11 minutes late, which is a technique, and he sat down and he looked around the table, and his eyes went across me and kept going. He did not know me. 18 years of ground rent invoices, 4 amendments, a personal covenant with his own signature on it, and he had never once, in his entire life, needed to know what I looked like. I sat there and watched him scan the table for the person who mattered, and land on Ingrid, and address himself entirely to her. I'm told the trust won't sell, he said. The trust cannot sell, Ingrid said. The instrument prohibits it. Everything's for sale. Not everything, she said. That's the part that's difficult for people in your position. He turned a pen over on the table. He was better looking in person and much smaller, and both of those things surprised me. Then what is it you want, he said to Ingrid. Because you're 12 days from a reversion, my lenders will not survive, and I don't believe you actually want to own a building. You want something. Everybody wants something. Name it and let's be adults. Ingrid looked at me. I opened the folder in front of me, and I took out one thing and I slid it across the table. It was a photograph, not the video still. A photograph Priya's mother took at the baby shower 3 weeks after, of Priya standing sideways in front of a window in a yellow dress with her hand under the bump, laughing at something out of frame. Vance looked down at it. He looked at it for a while. "She teaches 7-year-olds who can't say their own names," I said. "You brushed off your sleeve." That was the sentence. He looked up at me then. He looked at me the way a man looks at a shape in the water. And I watched it arrive, not the guilt. I'm not going to lie to you and say I saw guilt. I don't think it was guilt. But the arrival, the actual moment of understanding that the invoice he had been signing every March for 18 years had a person attached to it. And the person had been sitting across from him for 4 minutes, and he had looked straight through him. "Kowalchuk," he said. Everett said, and I stood up and I buttoned my coat, and Ingrid gathered the folder and we left. He had 12 days. He did not resign. I want you to understand that, because everybody assumes he did. He fought it for 9 more days, and on December 17 the syndicate that financed Meridian Court, 4 lenders, led by a Schedule I bank, informed him in writing that a reversion of the land would trigger cross-default on $840 million of debt across 3 other Vance Meridian projects, and that if the default was not cured by the deadline, they would be exercising their remedies against him personally under his guarantees. The cure, remember, was defined on page 73. It was not money. It was his removal from any controlling interest in the leaseholder. On December 18th, the board of Vance Meridian Group voted 6-1 to remove Desmond Vance as chairman and to accept the immediate transfer of his controlling interest to a trustee for orderly sale. He voted against. The stake was sold on February 4 to the public sector pension plan that had announced it was reviewing its position back in October, the one that holds the retirement money of the province's teachers. Priya has, through 31 bi-weekly deductions a year, an infinitesimally small ownership interest in the 58-story tower, outside of which she was pushed down 3 steps. She thinks this is the funniest thing that has ever happened to anyone. She brings it up at dinner parties. She calls it her building. It's sold at a distressed price. He lost on the sale alone something in the neighborhood of $220 million. The building was renamed Hawthorne Court in April. The land is still ours. If you've come this far, do us the one small favor that keeps this going. Subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it is the whole reason we can keep making these. Thank you, sincerely. There is one more thing, and then I'm finished. The ground rent on that parcel is currently $1,940,000 a year, indexed to inflation, payable on the 31st of March every year until 2060. In 2011, to get his rent holiday during construction, Desmond Vance signed a personal covenant guaranteeing that rent for the remainder of the term. Not his company, him, personally. It survives assignment. It survives sale. It survives his removal from the board. His lawyers looked at it in January and told him what I already knew. He can be released from it only if the landlord agrees, and the landlord is a trust whose instrument requires the trustee to act in the interest of the beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries are my grandmother's descendants, and the trustee is me. He sold his stake. He did not sell his signature. Every March, the leaseholder pays the ground rent, and every March the leaseholder is late by exactly 1 week, because the pension fund's accounts payable department is enormous and slow, and every March a demand letter goes to the guarantor, and every March Desmond Vance's assistant sends a check to cover the shortfall, because that is what a guarantor of a late payment does, and every March that money goes out of the trust the same afternoon it comes in, into the Ravel Okonkwo Fund. It pays for 2 things. It pays the tuition of educational assistants going back to school to become certified teachers in specialized classrooms, 9 of them this year, 4 of them working in this city. And it funds a legal clinic, 1 lawyer and 1 paralegal 3 days a week that represents custodial staff, cleaners, food service workers, and educational assistants in workplace assault and harassment complaints. For free. No means test. No NDA ever, under any circumstances, that is written into the terms of the grant, and I wrote it myself, and I put it on page 1. Bernadette Okonkwo sits on the fund's advisory committee. She is paid an honorarium for it, which she tried 3 times to refuse. Her daughter graduated in the spring, and in the lobby of Hawthorne Court, on the wall to the left of the waterfall, on the ground floor of a building that stands on my grandmother's 2 lots, there is a bronze plate about the size of a cutting board, installed as a condition of the pension fund's purchase, which I negotiated over 11 weeks and which cost the trust a rent concession I will never tell Priya about. It says, the Raval Okonkwo Fund, established in the year 2025, For those who were treated as though they were nobody, on the ground where it happened, he does not know that his checks pay for it. He has never asked where the shortfall goes. Why would he? It is one line on a statement, in a company he no longer controls, on a building he no longer owns. And the thing about a man like that is that he has spent his entire life not reading the pages after page 60. Now, the last thing I want to say about Desmond Vance is not about what happened to him. It is about the assumption that made it possible. He came out of those doors at speed. He found a woman in a cardigan holding a box of laminated cards, and he removed her from his path, and he cleaned her off his sleeve, and he did all of that in under 9 seconds without one single moment of calculation. Not because he is a monster. I have thought about this a great deal, and I don't think he is. And I think if he were a monster, the story would be easier and mean less. He did it because he had lived for 25 years inside a geometry of power so consistent and so obvious that it no longer required checking. Nurses, teachers, custodians, the woman with the floor scrubber, the woman on the steps. The visible metrics were clear. He was the largest object in the room. He always had been. And he wasn't wrong about the geometry. That's the part people don't like. Priya was the person with the least visible power on those steps. She was a public school teacher in a cardigan. He was a billionaire in a jacket that cost more than her monthly take-home. What he could not see, what nobody can ever see, is that the most expensive thing on that block was not his building. It was a page in a drawer, written in 1961 by a woman with a grade 6 education who had been told to come back when she had a husband. She did not write Clause 19.4 to protect rich men. There is a reason she crossed out one word and wrote ordinary instead. She wrote it because she had stood on the wrong side of a counter and been made into nobody by a man who was perfectly polite about it. And she went home that night, and she decided that if she could not stop it from happening to her, she would build something that would still be standing when it happened to somebody else. It took 64 years. It was there the whole time. It was on page 71, and 4 different men signed their names beneath it, and not one of them ever read it, because the boilerplate is where the money isn't. That is the specific danger of power that never gets checked. It doesn't turn you cruel, it turns you incurious. It produces a man who walks at full speed through a building he has never looked up at, past a bronze plate he has never read, on land he never bothered to learn the ownership of, brushing something off his sleeve. I am not going to pretend I felt triumphant. What I felt on February 4, when the transfer closed, was closer to what you feel when you finally finish the job in the basement, the sense of a thing done properly, and the quiet afterward, and the mild embarrassment of having taken so long. Our daughter was born on the 9th of January. We named her Helena, and Priya was the one who suggested it, and she suggested it before she knew what was on page 71, and I have never told her that. She is 9 months old now. She has her mother's stillness and her great-great-grandmother's disposition, which is to say she is entirely unmoved by the size of any object in the room. Every March I will sign the receipt for a check from a man who does not know my daughter's name, and the money will go to a woman he humiliated beside a waterfall, and to 9 educational assistants he will never meet, and to a lawyer who takes the calls of people nobody believes. Build the thing before you need it. Read the pages nobody reads. Sign nothing you have not finished. And in any corridor, on any staircase, in any lobby with a waterfall in it, never assume you know which person in the room is nobody. It is almost always the one you have not yet troubled yourself to look at.